This project was on the benefits for professors and students of being able to obtain feedback and the use of provided resources. My name is Dr. Walker, and I'm at the University of the Incarnate Word. Now, as a professor, one of my main goals is I want students to understand what I'm teaching about by using specific resources, specifically the textbook. I'm not going to buy a textbook unless it's a great resource. So one of my main goals for this project was me thinking I was going to use the best textbook ever with the resources it provided. And then I also wanted to look at several other things that were provided and how useful they were if they utilized these resources. So I have a couple of questions here under my rationale and significance. So how do professors decide the best textbook to use in a specific content area? How much time do we actually spend on this? How do professors know if the textbook is going to be the best resource for their students? And do the students actually use that textbook? You can see that there have been some previous studies that have looked into this. One of our goals is to help students in the learning and understanding of our specialized discipline areas. So by examining the use of the textbook that we have chosen and to see if it's actually a good resource for our students, that's what I'm asking here. And I mentioned there's other resources that we can look at as well. So obtaining this student feedback can provide us insight into how a professor integrates resources within their course. So before we had the transition to online courses, I conducted this study at that time. I had about 84 undergraduate students that were in my classes, and I had a series of questions that I asked and wanted to know, really, here's what I've provided, here's what I've talked about, here's what I reminded you about prior to the first exam. And so I give you a couple of examples here. Did you use the textbook quiz and the tests that are provided with the textbook while you were practicing and studying for that first exam? So that's one of the things I want to look at. Students were asked if they could change, would they change the use of the certain resources I had provided for them prior to that exam. And I also asked them to report how much they studied for the first exam and if they plan to change their study habits for the next. So when I was going through all of this, I need to describe a little bit about what I was providing for them. So some of the things I provided for them was letting them know that the textbook had flashcards they could use. I wanted to know if they could rewrite their notes while they were studying. Did they create their own study questions? Did they use the textbook resources that were provided? And did they use some of the personal resources that I had provided? And I'm saying personal, it's because I didn't actually create this stuff. So for example, one of the journal articles, Optimizing Learning by Putnam et al., 2016, or Dr. Chu's video series on study habits and note-taking. Those were the things I kind of provided for them to add to their skills of studying. In terms of the results, you can see on average here, we see that the majority of the students in my classes studied for approximately 3 hours. In some of my classes, they're senior level classes that are a little bit more complicated. And so this was one of the things I had talked about, is that they need to study a little bit more than that for some of these more advanced courses. You can see the pie charts here at the bottom. It's hard to read the little text, so I'll talk about each one. The first one, I asked the students, did you use the flashcards? The red means no. So the majority of my students did not use the flashcards that were provided by the textbook. The next one over asked, do you rewrite your notes? And it shows that a little more than half of my class, my students, did rewrite their notes to help them clarify what they were learning. The third one asked, did you create your own questions? A lot of red on this one. The majority of my students did not utilize one of the strategies I talked about of creating their own questions to help them pull out the information. The one at the bottom, I was asked, did you use the personal resources that the professor provided you? And I'm thankful that the majority of my students did utilize those resources from the journal article and those video series from Dr. Chu. And then the last question I had here, did you use the textbook resources? Within some of the textbooks, they had quizzes, and at the end of the chapters, they had practice tests, things like that. And the majority of my students did not use that. So I was really surprised by that. I also asked a couple of open-ended questions. And then you can see out of the 84, a lot of them did not give me their responses here, but I wanted to share with you some of the examples that they said. So the majority of the students that responded to this first question, how will you change the way you studied? They said they'll start studying earlier, they'll study more than they previously studied for exam one. A few students said they would study using their notes and textbook, and then little to no information on using more of the resources that were provided. The second question was, how can the instructor be more helpful? Well, 8 of those 17 students that responded said the instructor had provided the assistance that was needed, and then some other students said they needed more information on the study guide or outlines I provided. And then one student said it would be helpful to meet with the instructor to verify their understanding. So, I get some feedback here that can be helpful, but one of the main things I notice is that the majority of my students were not using any of the resources. So this helped provide me some information that could be used basically early on in every semester, because then I can redirect their study techniques and remind them of these resources after that. They have this idea now, my plan did not work for me. Let me go back and see what these resources could do to help me learn and understand the material better. The results of this survey implies further discussion, and I'm actually already doing some more research on this. I am started teaching online full-time last summer when our university switched to the online courses. And so starting last summer, fall, and now currently in the spring, I have been conducting surveys at the end of the semester because I've increased the types of resources and how I am sending them to the students. And I'm continuing to conduct a survey after the first exam to provide me feedback. And this allows me to keep communicating with them that in all my classes, the textbooks that we use are useful and they're a great resource, but there's other things that you can utilize to help you succeed in these courses.